Brother, I swear. Ken Lacourt asks the best questions on the internet. I don't even want to hear it. I'm a fan, sir. I'm a fan. Who killed Jesus? Romans or Jews? Man, what you say ancient Rome? I click. Link in the description, pinned comment, subscribe to his channel. Don't be a muppet. Let's go.
Who killed Jesus? Growing up, I was always a little confused about it. I mean, there was the popular notion that Jews did it. But it was also pretty clear that Rome was running the place, and they were actually the ones who nailed him on a cross.
Rome was running the place, all right. Rome was running the known world. Could you imagine if Rome was running the world right now in an alternative reality? That's a video you should make, Ken Lacourt. This is what the equivalent of Fox News or CNN would sound like. That's the news in our alternate reality. Check this out.
Tamen lorica segmentata est ipsissimum genus loicae quod repente in mentem venit quando cunque cogitemus de militibus Romanis. Hic vero miles rei publicae militans in legione Iuli Caesaris, videlicet rei publicae legionarius lorica segmentata armatus parum historicus est.
Back to us.
Was this a case of bad PR, or was something deeper going on? I'm Ken Lacourt. I tackle questions like this, and I try to give you the most honest answer I can find to elephants in rooms. For this video, we'll first look at what the Bible says really happened.
Yeah.
Then we'll look at who had the power to actually execute someone in Roman Judea.
The governor.
How that blame led to 2,000 years of violence, and whether, in the end, does it even matter who killed Jesus? So, what really happened? It's a straightforward question, and we've got multiple written ancient accounts, so it seems like it should be easy to sort out. But
by the way, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to let him speak first, make him build a case, but I will jump in. Quite a bit of information if relevant, because ancient Rome is a thing that, I'm kind of a maniac about, and I have researched particularly the crucifixion from a legal perspective, from a medical perspective, from an ancient Roman legal perspective. So we'll see if it fits, if I feel that anything like that could connect well with what he's saying, either to disagree or to agree and expand, I will.
Here's one issue. Outside of what's written in the Bible, we've got almost nothing to go on. Jewish historian Josephus mentions it in passing at around 93 AD. Jesus was crucified by Pilate. Roman historian Tacitus wrote about it around 116 AD. Besides the Bible, that's essentially it.
For a direct mention of the crucifixion, yes, he's correct. When we look at indirect mentions, there is one more that I would like to address, which also reconnects well with what people will definitely try to attack, which is the historicity of Jesus in the comments, which I've already addressed multiple times on this channel. But one thing at a time. For our approach to be diachronic, we should begin with possibly the earliest mention or reference to Jesus. Now, this is an indirect one related to a citation by Thallus, a Greek language historian from 52 BC. Thallus is quoted in a fragment of the History of the World by Sextus Iulius Africanus, who wrote instead between the 2nd and 3rd century AD. We read, open quotes, "The most terrible darkness descended over all the earth. The stones were broken by an earthquake, and much of Judea and the rest of the region were disturbed." Thallus, in the 3rd book of the Histories, defines this darkness as a solar eclipse. As for me, this seems inexplicable. Close quotes. According to several patristic scholars, the eclipse reported by Thallus, which another classical author, Phlegon of Tralles, refers to the reign of Tiberius, the second Roman emperor after Octavianus Augustus, and it would coincide with the darkness reported in the Gospels concurrent with Jesus' crucifixion. The testimony, however, while being compelling and evocative, is objectively rather fragmentary from a scholarly perspective, and the fact that Thallus speaks of that episode and its manifestation in Judea doesn't necessarily mean he also cites the figure of Jesus, who in any case is missing from the fragment. So we should probably identify this as more of a support of the idea of the historicity of Jesus by indirectly reinforcing the validity of the Gospels through an external mention of an episode that we do find in the Gospel and we're familiar with. Definitely not a strong piece of evidence, but definitely worth a mention.
So what we know about the crucifixion comes from the 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And of course, people have different beliefs about how reliable those books are. You can approach the Gospels in a few ways. Some believe they're literally God's word, 100% accurate down to the letter. If that's you, the story's more straightforward, but even then, the Gospels vary on some of the details, although certainly not the core claims. Or maybe you're like some Christians and historians, and you think they're human documents that give insight into real-life events, but also include historical memory, legend, and theology. And some people think the whole book is made up and it has no relation to history at all, which really leaves you with nowhere to go here, because without the Gospels, we'd know nothing about Jesus' death. For the New Testament, though, virtually all serious scholars agree that Jesus existed and was crucified under Pontius Pilate.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting the number of, I'm sure you get them too, Ken, quote, the number of people that probably out of either church hurt or just whatever, like maybe politics, just own the charts and whatnot, they will flood the comment section just to say Jesus didn't exist. Historical Jesus never existed. It's a made-up story. Basically, the mythicists. Mythicists have no legs to stand on whatsoever, and as Ken correctly said, it is the majority of historians that believe that Jesus absolutely existed. Like, one thing is the claim of faith, when someone like me will say, not only I believe Jesus existed, but I believe he was resurrected. I don't believe that Jesus was, I believe that Jesus is. But that's a claim of faith. If you tell me, well, you believe that, but I don't believe it, I'll respect that 100%. I respect you, and the fact that you don't believe it, it's absolutely your option. You're entitled to that. But when we talk about the historicity, when people say Jesus did not exist, it's just a myth, you are making a stance of faith, because there is no reason to be that categorical. You could tell me, hey, I've reviewed the historical evidence, I'm not convinced. But to say that it's categorically a made-up character, it's a statement of faith, or should we say counterfaith at this point.
For people skeptical of treating the Gospels as a perfect historical record,
of course,
here are some of their objections. First, the accounts don't line up perfectly. Events appear in some books, but not others, and a few things seem to contradict each other. Believers say it's because different people wrote from different points of view or used literary devices, and skeptics say it's proof that the books aren't accurate. Then there's the timing. These books weren't written down until 50-ish years after Jesus died. Mark came first, around 70 AD. John came last, maybe 90 to 100 AD. Even if the disciples wrote some of them, and scholars argue about that, that's decades of time before we have written words. Also, there was political pressure.
I want to speak because, the political pressure is important, particularly when it comes to ancient Rome. I would like to say this idea, if you write decades after, for the minutiae of details, I can see how, like, for instance, because we have to imagine this. I was in the Navy when I was 18, in the Italian Navy, and now I'm 44. It's been decades. Now, if you ask me specific details, like what did you eat on the third day that you have reached the barracks, I'll tell you, I haven't got a clue, I don't remember. However, if you ask me for things that made an impact to me, like, for instance, the first night that I served as a guard inside the barracks, or the first night that I was assigned to guard duty at the gates, I can tell you quite a lot of information. I can tell you I was there for about 8 hours. I remember standing. I remember it was cold. I remember that there was an officer that came to speak to me. I remember he had an accent from eastern Sicily, from Catania, even though I was serving in Puglia. Interestingly enough, if someone asks me what's the name of the barracks where you served, I will say Maricentro di Taranto. 100%. There is a lot. I can in fact tell you that we would have to wake up at 6:30 in the morning, but if you woke up at 6, then you had enough time to get cornetti, so croissant, but they would be all eaten up by the time you woke up at 6:30. All of these details are real, and it happened decades ago. So this idea that only because they only wrote it decades, right, but we're talking about someone who, even if you don't want to use the God part as like you would definitely remember that, but fine, you don't want to use that because you want to approach it full secularly, I can respect that. Well, then someone who was extremely charismatic, because we have to give that to Jesus, extremely charismatic. So, I remember a lot of that happened decades ago. Would they forget maybe minutia? Yes, it's possible that they would misremember something, but the core elements, once again, just because a few decades have passed, it means nothing. You can absolutely, it doesn't automatically prove that then it's all bullshit and it's impossible to write it down, or we should completely disregard all the information because they didn't write it the day after. Really think about it. I did it with my conscription, but you can think of whatever happened 20 years ago to you. Think of an event that was significant. How much could you write down now if you were asked to?
Pressure. The Gospels were written after Rome destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, and Christians were then living under Roman rule.
Right.
Openly blaming Rome for killing their Messiah could be dangerous, and shifting the blame towards Jewish authorities could be a safer path. Yet however you interpret the Bible, it's the only real source of the story, which is this. It starts on Passover, the biggest holiday on the Jewish calendar, and the city's packed with pilgrims. Jerusalem's normal population of maybe 40,000.
I love the information and research he puts in.
Swells to about 10 times that from people all over. Roman troops are on high alert. And also, Passover celebrates the exodus from Egypt and Jews' freedom from oppression. So it's a tense time celebrating under Roman rule.
Of course.
Jesus enters the city to crowds shouting his praise, waving branches and throwing down coats. Christians call it Palm Sunday. But it's important not to exaggerate the popularity of that event at the time. Most Jews in Jerusalem probably have no clue who Jesus is when he arrives.
Of course.
His ministry was only a couple years old, centered mainly in Galilee, which was about 60 miles away. He's regionally famous, but not a household name. The Palm Sunday crowd is most likely a small fraction of the people there for the week. A few days later, Jesus walks into the temple and flips over the money changers' tables and accuses the merchants of turning the holy temple into a den of robbers. This isn't just Jesus being rude. The temple was the economic and religious heart of Jewish life. Disrupting it publicly is a direct challenge to the authorities who run it.
Isn't it interesting that we have this account, and yet there's still this idea that when they say, what would Jesus do, and they're using it as a way to tell you got to be nice. I like being kind. With that being said, just what would Jesus do depends, because there are situations where there is such a thing as righteous indignation, which is a righteous form of anger. And Jesus himself flipped the table. You know when I often say, I'm going to flip the table? He did. He flipped the table, but with a Roman Judea accent, I guess.
And he got their attention. Then one of his own disciples sells him out. Judas Iscariot leads the temple guards to find and arrest Jesus. Why does he do it? No one knows for sure. The Gospels say he's been skimming from the group's treasury, and we're told he's paid 30 pieces of silver for the betrayal. Matthew says Judas later felt remorse and hanged himself.
Right.
Temple authorities dragged Jesus before the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, and the high priest, Caiaphas. They charged Jesus with blasphemy for claiming to be the Son of God and the Messiah. Under Jewish law, that's serious. But there's a bigger problem for Jesus, because the charges go beyond religion into politics. Being accused of calling himself King of the Jews challenges Roman authority.
That's why when I looked into this, I think that probably the way the Romans pinned it legally after they saw that the masses just wanted it, they kept pushing it, and the government just gave in, I think it would have been sedition. And the reason why I think it would have been sedition is because, well, I'll give you a little extract as to why, but I think you can guess it by the way he's referred to in the crucifixion text right next to the other two people that were crucified.
And that's something Rome will kill you for. So they take him to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor running Judea. They reframe the charge, emphasizing sedition instead of blasphemy.
See, very well done. Very well done. As usual, Ken Lacourt. 10 out of 10.
Now, according to the Gospels, Pilate questions Jesus and says he doesn't find a basis for the charges. But a crowd is gathered outside and they want blood. Pilate tries an out, offering to release one prisoner as a Passover custom. They can choose Jesus or Barabbas. He's described as an insurrectionist and a murderer, exactly the kind of man Rome usually executed. And the crowd picks him to save. Then Pilate does something interesting in Matthew. He washes his hands in front of the crowd and says, I'm innocent of this man's blood. It's your responsibility.
Yeah, good luck with that. What does accusation mean from a legal perspective? Jesus was crucified. There is a specific reason as to why people get crucified in the Roman world. And that, in fact, within Roman law is divided between times of war and times of peace.
There were a wide range of offences that were punishable by crucifixion according to Roman law. During times of peace, those who inflicted the penalty acted within the constraints of the rule of law, together with the pressure of the political circumstances. During wartime, crucifixion could be used and was used en masse, sometimes in a particularly brutal way. Look at Spartacus's rebellion. 6,000 survivors of the revolt, captured by the legions of Crassus, were crucified, lining the Appian Way, from Rome to Capua. Now let me show you what that actually means on a map of Italy. The Appian Way is one of the earliest and strategically most important Roman roads of the ancient Republic. It connected Rome to Brundisium, modern-day Brindisi, in southeast Italy. In Roman orderings of crucifixion during peacetime, however, the situation was different. Consideration was usually given to culpability, and a basic hearing was often given. So what were the crimes? Banditry, murder, treason and sedition, defamation of the emperor, military desertion and cowardice, rebellion, provincial resistance and revolt, civil war, membership in a despised religious group. Within the Roman world, banditry generally has to do with either murder or kidnapping. Bandits are also named in Latin latrones, which is different from the common thieves, praedones. So you would be considered a bandit depending on the violence of your crimes, including murder, the magnitude of your robberies, and the gathering of a band around you. Provincial governors were thus ordered to hunt bandits down for the sake of public order and crucify them. Treason and sedition are relatively similar, but in general can be understood as crimes against the people and state of Rome. And by the times of Augustus, defamatory speech or anything written against the imperial family would be considered treason, and therefore, to the cross we go.
Given Pontius Pilate did say that he found no guilt in this man, but after he decided to wash his hands, he still needed to justify legally the execution, specifically by crucifixion, of Jesus. Now, we know, of course, that Jesus didn't murder anyone. He didn't speak against the imperial family. So how can they pin crucifixion to this man? Well, the only way, legally, from a Roman perspective, that this could be even close to being justified would be the following. He had a gathering of men around him, so they pinned the accusation of rebellion against him as an instigator, which was false, of course. Now, do remember that we know that at least some of the apostles were carrying weapons, specifically bladed weapons. We see this during the arrest of Jesus and a certain sword that is used to defend him, but also in the passage when Jesus instructs the apostles to sell some mantles and use the money to buy some swords, most likely for personal defense. This could be a point used by his opponents, their opponents, to point it towards Roman, to point it as a fake proof of a possible instigation or rebellion or preparation thereof. We now fast forward to the crucifixion itself, and as you know, Jesus is not alone in the Golgotha, and with him there are two men. Now, usually these two men are considered to be thieves or perhaps robbers, but once again, through the lenses of correct literal interpretation of the original text, we may find out more about who these two men actually were. Depending on which of the Gospels you read, these two men are either described as robbers or, in the case of Luke, as criminals. Criminals not to be intended as an insult, but as a descriptive term of someone who's committed a crime, in this case against Roman authority. So let's focus on Luke for a moment. Two others who were criminals were led away to put to death with him. So if you read it in English, the feeling you get is these two have committed a crime, they are criminals, but from Roman perspective, he isn't. Well, let's jump into interlinear Greek again. Were being led away now also other criminals with him to be put to death. So to make it make sense within English syntax, were being led away now also two other criminals with him to be put to death. In the original language, the connection of also, other, and then two actually brings forth a different perspective. Imagine it this way. If I told you, this morning I was at Starbucks with two YouTubers, this sentence doesn't tell you anything about what I do. But if the sentence was, this morning I was at Starbucks with two other YouTubers, what's my job? Of course, this doesn't mean that Jesus was a revolutionary. It just means that from the perspective of the authorities, it is very likely that he was condemned with the accusation of sedition.
The crowd shouts back, "His blood be on us and on our children." Now, it appears in only one of the four Gospels, but it would be used to justify centuries of violence against Jews. The Gospels show Pilate as a reluctant, borderline sympathetic figure, like he's trying to save Jesus, but getting pressured into killing him by the crowd. Other historical looks at Pilate describe him as brutal.
Yes, that's correct. I will intercede a little bit on Pilate, since that is something that I've looked into myself.
Someone who'd execute people without hesitation to maintain order. And Rome crucifies thousands of people as a standard practice. After Spartacus's slave revolt, they lined the Appian Way with 6,000 crucified slaves, one for every 40 yards over 120 miles.
Goodness gracious, that would have been like walking in literal hell.
People who question the Gospel's narrative say that it doesn't make sense that a Roman governor who routinely crucified people would have had hesitation over Jesus. In any event, Pilate gives the order and Roman soldiers carry it out.
It could also be, though, that the charisma of Jesus was so strong that Pilate liked him. So kind of didn't want to. It's possible.
A sign was nailed above Jesus' head reading, King of the Jews.
Yeah,
so what happened next? Christians believe that 3 days later, Jesus rose from the dead. He keeps teaching for another 40 days before ascending to heaven. 6 years later, in 36 AD, both Pilate and Caiaphas get fired by Rome.
You know what I think? He preached for 40 days, but I'm just thinking, that's resurrected Jesus. Did he sleep? He probably didn't need to sleep as a resurrected being, so it should count as 80 days of preaching.
Not because of Jesus, but Pilate and Caiaphas get fired by Rome. Not because of Jesus, but Pilate had massacred a group of Samaritans, causing a diplomatic mess, and Caiaphas, who'd worked closely with him, he lost his position as well. At that point, Jesus' followers numbered maybe a few thousand. They're still considered a Jewish sect, not yet a separate religion.
Yeah, by the Romans, that's correct.
And 40 years later, Rome destroys the temple and kills or expels most Jews from Jerusalem. The system that Caiaphas had been trying to protect by getting rid of Jesus gets wiped out anyhow. So that's the basic story, but it raises a few questions, such as who actually had the power to make that call? But before we get there, let's talk about something that's often on my mind since I left journalism. How broken news coverage is.
That's ground news. All right, let me see if I can find the code. What is the code? Well, here is the thing to click for his... this is from a while ago. It's possible that the thing is already over, actually. Yeah.
Missing entire stories. Ground News breaks you out of that bubble. I'm on the Vantage plan and I check it daily. Use ground.news/elephants for 40%
/elephants, 40% off.
Or scan the QR code. They're one of my most routine sponsors.
Bro, you need to make a video on Hannibal Barker. What bigger elephant in the room than that?
And they help keep this channel running, so thanks for supporting them. So now let's look a little deeper into the crucifixion of Jesus. The Gospels aren't subtle about blame, but who had the power to actually ensure Jesus was killed? To figure that out, we need to look at three different groups. The Jewish crowd that was at the legal proceedings before he was killed, Rome, who ran the empire, and the Jewish religious leadership who ran the day-to-day operations inside of Jerusalem. First, how many people are we talking about? The Gospels never actually say how big the crowd at Pilate's headquarters was. It could have been dozens, hundreds, or more. But whatever that number, we're still talking about a fraction of the Jewish population in the city that week. As I mentioned, most Jews in Jerusalem likely had no idea what was going on, and they were off preparing their own Passover celebrations.
Yes.
So when we say the crowd, we're talking about whomever showed up at the Roman governor's residence early in the morning during a legal proceeding.
Oh my gosh, what is it with their faces? AI, I suppose?
And another question, does blaming specific people justify
Maybe it's not AI, maybe it was a painting. Does blaming specific people justify blaming an entire group? No.
blaming an entire group? Now, that totally feels unfair, but the Bible certainly has stories where a group of people is punished collectively for a sin they didn't all commit. When the Pharaoh wouldn't let Moses and his people go, all of Egypt was punished with plagues.
It's possible that we could see it as it's just a consequence of what happened. Because, if your leader, apart from the fact that we could also say in democratic societies, you choose your leader, so you might be accountable of your voting, even if he makes choices. If you don't, that could be something to be explored. Same with republics and sort of representative leadership up to a certain extent. Although then, if it's not a pure form of democracy, then the people are not directly voting for the policies. It's their representatives that do. But anyways, you know what I'm talking about. But in general, I would say probably when it comes to situations such as what's happening in Egypt, it's not that the people are necessarily being punished. It's that it's a consequence of the punishment received by the evil Pharaoh. And then it's one way to see it, kind of a butterfly effect, if you will.
Death of their firstborn sons. The entire world during the flood was punished, except for Noah and his family. Now, I could point to a lot of examples, which of course people can interpret in various ways.
Sure.
But still, it's a consistency. But it was also kind of an intramural fight. At the crucifixion, it was Jews disagreeing with other Jews about whether Jesus, also a Jew, was really their Messiah.
Yeah.
So the phrase, the Jews killed Jesus, it only makes sense if you look at it backward through centuries of religious separation. These are kind of philosophical questions we can't totally answer.
It's actually a good point because his apostles were also, most of them, Jews, right? So his followers would have also been Jews, but they stopped being Jews religiously when they start following Jesus. And while the name Christianity still wasn't there, it still is Christianity, what Jesus is now preaching. And so, yeah.
So now let's look who actually had the authority in the time of Jesus to have him killed. To understand that, we need to understand how Rome governed. They didn't micromanage every province. That's too expensive and complicated.
Not to mention, not every province is the same. You've got different statuses. Yeah, is that how you pronounce it? Like you have colonies, you have protectorate. It's a lot of...
Instead, they made deals with local elites. You keep order, collect our taxes, don't cause problems. In return, you keep your position, your wealth, and if you screw it up, Rome crushes you. This happened everywhere. Gaul, Egypt, Syria, and Judea, which meant that the Jewish religious leadership was in charge.
Even more so, considering that probably a lot of Roman authority figures would have thought it as some backwater, really, particularly in comparison to other areas, such as the area of Africa Proconsularis, or even Sicily, the granary of Rome.
So first, we have Caiaphas, the high priest. This wasn't just a religious job for him, it was political. Rome appointed him, and Rome could fire him any time. His job was to collect taxes, maintain order, prevent rebellion, basically keep the province from becoming a problem. And here's what's interesting. Caiaphas held that job for 18 years, an unusually long time. Most high priests lasted a year, maybe 2, before Rome replaced them. Caiaphas kept his job because he kept Rome happy. He wasn't some religious extremist trying to protect Judaism. He was a government operative trying to protect his position.
Government operative. We're very well... Man, this guy, wordsmith.
And probably his people. And Jesus was a variable he couldn't control. Then there's the Sanhedrin, the 71-member Jewish council, and it was made up from priests and important people throughout. And they had real power over religious law, disputes, even crimes. They could arrest people, hold trials, and impose punishments. But they had power only because Rome let them. Now, scholars debate whether they could actually execute someone, kind of generally leaning towards yes for religious violations. But anything touching on Roman political concerns required Roman approval. Jesus, he touched on both, which is why they took him to Pilate.
Makes sense.
The Gospel of John spells out the motivation.
I think they were trying to do that, though, because if you think about it, when they say, what should we do about paying taxes, they're really trying to get him to say, don't pay taxes to Rome. They were trying to pin that down on him, which probably tells us that without intervention of state authorities, I don't think personally that the priest authorities would have had enough power to execute someone who was popular with people. That's probably what it was. So maybe they could have technically have had that sort of authority if it was someone that, nobody cared about. But Jesus, as you say, was regionally famous, and even more so in his own area. And so that made it difficult. It's like, whatever, people are not going to like it, so we're going to need something more powerful. He needs to break the law with Rome, because we know that no one is going to complain about Rome. What are you going to do? So they make sure they're not going to rebel against us. They're going to rebel against Rome, but that's not going to happen because Rome is Rome. So it makes sense to me that that's one of the reasons why they try to push it towards state intervention.
Motivation of Caiaphas pretty clearly, saying, if we let him go on like this, the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation. Then, it's better that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. It was cold political math. And look at it from his perspective. Jesus is calling temple authorities corrupt. He's flipping over tables. He's attracting unpredictable crowds. And real unrest, everyone knows that leads to one thing: Roman soldiers and a crackdown. Jewish self-governance only existed because Caiaphas kept things stable. Better to eliminate a troublemaker than risk everything he spent his career building. So now let's look at Pilate's point of view. Someone claiming to be king of the Jews, that's sedition, a direct challenge to Roman authority. And Rome's response to claims like this, it's crucifixion. It's a horrible death.
Kind of depending on,
Designed to send a message to anyone thinking about rebellion. For Pilate, it really wasn't complicated or personal. So the temple leadership had real but limited authority. Think of them like middle management. And a small group of temple elites definitely wanted Jesus dead, a political move to protect their position. Rome executed him, and that was standard operating practice. As always, I did my best putting this together. But if I made a mistake, let me know and I'll correct it in a pinned comment below. Also in the description box where you can see the script and source notes and things like that. Okay, so how did a routine Roman execution become grounds for 2,000 years of violence? Again, early Christians were Jewish, and blaming the Jews would have made no sense because they were all Jews. A common enemy was Rome, which was actively persecuting them. But then Christianity spread beyond Judea, attracting Gentiles throughout the Roman Empire.
Man,
It separated
I love that animation.
from Judaism, becoming its own religion. In 313 AD, it was legalized, and later in the century, it became Rome's official religion.
Man, what a plot twist.
That created a problem. You're now the official religion of an empire, and your foundational story has Rome executing your god. I mean, that's not convenient. So some argue that was behind the narrative shifting to the Jews being the villains in the story.
Okay, that's an interesting way to put it.
And once that happened, other accusations piled on. Of course, if you're going to make that argument, you also have to concede that the gospel writers were truthful about some parts, but deliberately changed up others for their own good. In any event, as time went on, Jews weren't accused of just killing Christ. They were enemies of Christianity who rejected the true Messiah. There was economic resentment and more. The accusations fed off of each other. They killed and rejected Christ, so God cursed them. The only way out was to convert. That played out for centuries. Medieval church councils restricted Jewish rights and required identifying badges. Crusaders massacred Jewish communities. Pogroms erupted repeatedly.
To be fair, Crusaders massacred anything.
Especially during Holy Week. And this wasn't just fringe theology. Until the 60s, Catholic liturgy for Good Friday included prayers about perfidious Jews. It was taught in seminaries and preached from the pulpits. Over centuries, this created the legal infrastructure, ghettos, badges, restrictions that the Nazis modernized. After the Holocaust, the Catholic Church finally reversed its course. In 1965, it officially rejected collective guilt and condemned anti-Semitism explicitly. Most Protestant denominations followed. But there is an irony to this. I mean, much of Christianity spent 1,500 years hating Jews while literally worshiping a Jewish God, reading Jewish scripture, and praying to a Jewish Messiah. Jesus, Mary, all the apostles, Paul, the prophets, every major figure in Christianity was Jewish.
Ethnically and in fact even religiously at some point. That's correct.
So all this being said, does it even matter who killed Jesus? I mean, according to Christian doctrine, all humans are sinners.
Yes.
Jesus came specifically to die for those sins.
Yep.
This was prophesied for centuries before Jesus was even born. Isaiah 53:5, written about 700 years before Jesus, says, "But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." If you're a Christian, Jesus had to die for the resurrection to happen. If no one killed him, there's no salvation. Jesus himself says in John,
Yeah, in fact, if you're a Christian, you basically believe that Jesus allowed them to kill him. If we are really going to go into the details, that's what Christian doctrine says, because he does say, you don't think that if I called up into heaven, then my Father wouldn't send me heavenly hosts of angels? He says that, which, again, if you believe in it, it means Jesus could stop them any moment if he wanted to, but he chooses not to.
John, "No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down
See?
of my own accord."
Exactly.
He wasn't a victim. He was a willing participant
True.
in God's plan.
Yes.
The early Christian apostles understood this. When Peter preached after Jesus' death in the book of Acts, he said that the people acted in ignorance, and God used it to fulfill prophecy. The focus was on the resurrection and the salvation, not on revenge or assigning blame.
Yeah, of course.
Most mainstream Christian theologians frame it this way. He went willingly to fulfill a divine purpose. And if we're all sinners and Jesus died for all of our sins, then in a theological sense, we all killed Jesus. In that case, if there's collective blame to be had, it goes to everyone, or at least all you sinners. Hey, I'm not sure if we solved this question beyond a reasonable doubt, but the question I raised in this other video I made actually has most historians coming to a common conclusion.
What question?
Were slaves in America really bred for strength? And does that account for why we see so many successful black athletes today?
One last thing I wanted to say to drive the point home that once again, Jesus is historical. The non-Christian sources we have as evidence of Jesus' historicity are twofold. They come from Roman and Jewish authors. A dialectical analysis shows that these sources frequently manifest explicit antipathy towards Christianity. If they had a reason to question or doubt the existence of Jesus, the founder of Christianity, it would have benefited them to state it and use it. Yet, no one does. This is a very important contextual clue. Historically, Christianity shook the foundations of Roman theology and pagan worship within the empire, thus alerting the authorities, causing a harsh imperial response towards the new rising religion. That is why this is a fundamental socio-political factor to consider, so keep it in mind as we carefully review the words of the ancients.
It's a common theory.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated that, Ken Lacourt. As always, you watched this video with me, guys, but do go watch other videos of his and give him views, because it's really worth it. Fantastic channel. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. If you appreciate my content so far and wish to help ensure my ability to continue to tell it how it is, regardless of any possible backlash, please support this channel on Patreon. Any support helps me and my team of academics keep the channel strong and gives us the means to fight back against the political rewriting of history. Stand with us, form the wall, defend the truth.